Today's episode is brought to you by Mazars. SoundCartel. How exactly do you make decisions? And how much stress are you exposing yourself to when confronted by the important ones? From SoundCartel, I'm Nicole Goodman, and this is Business Essentials Daily. Making decisions can be harrowing for many people, but it doesn't have to be that way. Becoming comfortable with uncertainty and standing back and thinking consciously about how you make decisions are good places to start. Roger Perry is the Managing Director of Bevington Group, a consulting firm specialising in process improvement, business operating models and change management. He says business leaders can train themselves to become comfortable with decision-making through gentle exposure to uncertainty. And he says that being conscious of the context behind making a decision will result in the best choices, as he explains to Jeff Waters.
Think of life or every decision you make in three buckets. There's certainty. I know that if I drop this pen, gravity will take it to the floor because I'm on Earth and I'm not in space. So that's certainly easy. There's risk, and think of roulette wheels or games of chance where you actually know the probability. And knowing the probability is an amazing thing, but it requires in real life an awful lot of data, much of which we're now able to gather, or getting better at, and analyze through things like AI. And then there's uncertainty. The reality is that most business decisions fall into that uncertainty framework. And in that uncertainty framework, what you mustn't do is assume that you're dealing with a known risk percentage, because it'll give you a level of confidence that it just doesn't deserve. So knowing a precise probability is actually, technically speaking, risk. And there's a gentleman called Gigerenz who's written deeply about this. And then uncertainty is something different. It's actually where you are not just have a probability of something, but you're actually estimating the probability, which is in some sense probability is an estimate of whether something will happen or not. So you're doubling up a bit. So knowing that you're in a position of uncertainty then gives you the opportunity to go, okay, I need some strategies to manage this uncertainty. And that means that you'll consciously think about how you're going to make a decision. And thinking consciously about how you make a decision is not something that people are used to doing. They just go do it. So they don't face a problem and go, how am I going to make this decision? And that is actually one of the key differences.
How does the mind respond to volatility and uncertainty?
The human mind doesn't like uncertainty in the sense that many of us get rather stressed by not knowing the answer. So one of the tricks is to actually get comfortable with uncertainty. You can actually train your mind to get uncomfortable with uncertainty by putting yourself in uncertain situations. Even sometimes watching TV, actually, with shows about uncertainty can actually be helpful. So I've been, for example, encouraging my kids to watch a series called Alone on SBS, which is actually a reality survival show about how these people are making decisions under deep uncertainty, which could have incredible consequences for them. But generally speaking, the human mind doesn't like uncertainty. And what it can do is follow a route that it's always followed without thinking about whether that's the best thinking-making option. And many of us and different cultures respond in different ways, try to minimize the risk because everybody thinks that's what the game is, as opposed to balancing risk and opportunity. So minimizing risk is a way that the brain often responds to the stress of that uncertainty, but that closes all sorts of doors to opportunity. And you might have been minimizing risk that's actually very small because you haven't understood it properly, because you don't really recognize it. And not being able to estimate risk, importantly, leading to the wrong human response, is an important part of the risk intelligence theory and thinking. And effectively, if you're in a space where you're more comfortable and you know that business better, you're more likely to be able to estimate the risks correctly and have a less stressed human response. If it's a new area and you don't recognize the risk, you're likely to have a more stressed human response and either overdo it, take too much risk, or underdo it, take much less. So we respond to uncertainty with stress, which can affect our judgment about how to make a decision, or can actually make us potentially, unless we're risk seekers, so conservative that we miss an opportunity.
You talk about bulletproof problem solving. What is that and how can we employ it?
Well, really, actually, it's a book. And McLean et al. Wrote this book, and it's a 7-step process for solving problems. Now, it's not the only one. De Bono had a series of steps. De Bono had 10 steps. And then there's a shorter version, which is called TEC by De Bono, which is target, expand, and contract effectively. You can have a 5-minute think. But why have a framework? And the reason for having a framework, no matter which one you choose, whether it's 7, 10, or the 3, some sort of framework's incredibly valuable. Because what you're doing is you're saying, how am I going to solve this problem? And also, when have I thought enough about it? Which is a really big thing. So the good thing about these problem-solving methods is what they tend to do is help you be really clear about either the problem or objective, in which we sometimes don't have clarity, the major decision criteria, and by the way, we sometimes have too much of them. I've found in really difficult decisions, sometimes what you've actually got to do is just have 2 criteria, which I call vector theory. There are 2 vectors, because everything else, when you do a kind of weighted decision approach, which is this is how weighty that criteria is, and this is the extent to which it achieves it, that kind of weighted approach often just doesn't work because there are too many criteria. So it helps you think that through, and it helps you break the problem down into actual thinking chunks that are actually doable. Now, once you've actually practiced the structured method a few times, you just rock and roll. But it is good to have different options, and structured methods are not the only option. So there are multiple ones from a short think through to a long 10-step think. I think of them a 3, a 7, and a 10. But there are also rules of thumb approaches, and rules of thumb in uncertainty, as I mentioned Gigerenzer earlier, actually work. So a rule of thumb covers most of the situation, but not all. It doesn't have the statistical precision. But if you find someone whose gut feel tends to work all the time, and you just don't know why they're so good at it, it's probably that gut feel is actually an unconscious rule of thumb. Tease it out. Then you've got some real gold.
How can projects be seen through a risk learning sense?
So this idea is the idea, and this is a risk intelligence concept, and this idea is, okay, I've got a basket of projects, but in reality, if I can assess the risk best in a subject matter I know about, then if I'm going to take a risk, I've got to learn a lot about it quickly to be able to do well. So it's about learning about the risks in a particular area. Now, why is assessing risk right? So if you assess risk right, you'll get the balance of opportunity and risk management right. So because what you'll do is you'll go, well, if it's a lot of risk, I'm going to need some spare capital to cover myself if it goes wrong. Okay, I'm going to put a lot of capital in there. So you'll get the risk right. But if you misassess the risk, let's say you think it's too big for you to cope with, but you actually could, then you'll have missed an opportunity. And the way you get those fine-tuned risk assessments right is by actually learning. So when you take a portfolio of projects, you can think about cost, you can think about return, you can think about risk. You go, but actually, what's my learning stress? Is every one of the 10 projects I'm doing need intense learning from me? If so, that's too much. You can't learn 10 new fields at the same time. Actually narrow it down and give yourself a time to learn your domain well, so you can properly assess risks and make a balanced response based on the threat and the opportunities that you face. Because those who make the best decisions are those who know the context. And they'll also make decisions with much more confidence, and they'll also make decisions with less stress, so you won't have all sorts of nasty neurochemicals floating around your brain when you're trying to make a calm, balanced decision, because you know the space. So knowledge is power. It's also power here in this kind of decision-making under uncertainty framework.
That was Bevington Group Managing Director, Roger Perry. This episode of Business Essentials Daily is produced by the team at SoundCartel. Thanks for listening. I'm Nicole Goodman. We'll bring you more Be Daily tomorrow. Follow @BE Daily Podcast across social media and head to bedaily.com.au for more from the Business Essentials Daily podcast. SoundCartel. This episode was brought to you by Mazars. To find out more, visit mazars.com.au. That's mazars.com.au.